Thanks, Jesse. Good morning from Beijing. President Trump softened up his tone to China's president today. While back at home, lawmakers in the House and Senate get a first look at what divides them on tax reform. And a Republican Senate candidate faces some serious allegations that threaten to derail his candidacy. This is Special Report. Good morning from Beijing. I'm Bret Baier coming to you where it is 7 o'clock Friday morning. President Trump will leave here in China just 2 hours from now, bound for Vietnam after spending a very busy Thursday with Chinese President Xi Jinping. Both leaders promised to work together to denuclearize North Korea. Meanwhile, back at home, the Senate unveils its plan for tax reform as the House scrambles to make things add up with its own plan. We'll speak live with the chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee about the competing proposals in just a minute. But we begin with the president's final day here in China. Correspondent Kevin Cork has been traveling with the president and joins us live just down the road here in Beijing. Good evening. Good morning, Kevin.
Yeah, same to you, Brett. You're right. The president actually came here to China with a pair of major agenda items in mind, trade and, of course, North Korea. And while he leaves here having made progress in both cases, there were no major breakthroughs, despite the best efforts of both sides to improve U.S.-China relations. It was resplendent with pomp and pageantry. A Chinese charm offensive on behalf of 1 billion people meant for a party of one.
We're having a great time. Thank you.
You're a very special man for your gracious hospitality.
I offer this toast to you, to the people of your country, and to a friendship that will only grow stronger.
In person and online, President Trump just couldn't say enough about the experience and China's surprising willingness to stop North Korea's nuclear ambition in its tracks.
The United States is committed to the complete and permanent denuclearization of North Korea. So important. China can fix this problem easily and quickly.
We reiterated the firm commitment to achieving denuclearization of the peninsula and upholding international non-proliferation regime.
The pledge by the Chinese to keep nuclear weapons out of the hands of the rogue regime in Pyongyang presumes a willingness by Washington to let sanctions take their course and remain open to negotiation. The sort of collaboration few could have seen months ago from a possible Trump administration.
We can't continue to allow China to rape our country. I'm constantly talking about how they're ripping us off. They're using our country as a piggy bank to rebuild China.
In announcing $250 billion in trade with Beijing today, the president signaled a growing pragmatism and shifted the focus of his ire for poor trade deals of the past.
I do blame past administrations for allowing this out-of-control trade deficit to take place and to grow.
As you know, next up, it's off to Vietnam for the president for a pair of economic summits, Brett. TPP expected to be a major topic of discussion. Of course, TPP without the United States. That, as well as security cooperation in the region and a possible meeting with Vladimir Putin. We'll keep an eye on that. But for now, back to you.
Kevin Cork traveling with the president and just down the road in Beijing. Meantime, in Washington, Senate Republicans unveiled their tax plan this afternoon. It includes some stark differences to the House plan. Now it's up to both sides to bridge the divide to try to avoid a repeat of this summer's failure to repeal Obamacare. Chief Congressional Correspondent Mike Emanuel reports.
The amendment is agreed to.
Tax reform has taken a critical step in the House, passing the Ways and Means Committee 24-16. The vote coming after Ways and Means Chairman Kevin Brady offered a 29-page amendment to fine-tune the House plan.
We know we have more work yet to be done, but this is a historic step, and we look forward to sending this bill to the House and ultimately to the President's desk this year.
On the other side of the Capitol, Finance Chairman Orrin Hatch rolled out a Senate Republican tax reform plan. The House would cut to 4 brackets. The Senate maintained 7 brackets. The House would partially repeal state and local deductions, still allowing up to $10,000 for property taxes, while the Senate would totally scrap those deductions. Both the House and Senate would reduce the corporate rate to 20%, but the Senate would do it after a 1-year delay. The House would allow for mortgage deduction up to $500,000, while the Senate would permit mortgage deductions up to $1 million. Senate Democratic leader Chuck Schumer is trying to convince Republicans from high-tax states like New York, New Jersey, and California to run from the House bill.
Senate Republicans are telling House Republicans there'll be no compromise on state and local deductibility. It's full repeal or bust.
House Democratic leader Nancy Pelosi hammered the GOP for a lack of transparency.
Why don't we do it where there's the least opportunity for people to review it? Let's do it very fast. Very fast. Speed of light in the dark of night and back rooms without even their own members.
Pelosi has said tax reform could cost the GOP the majority. Speaker Paul Ryan told reporters Republicans will not lose the House on fixing the tax code.
This is about fulfilling our promises to the American people. I fundamentally believe when we do this, make good on our word, make good on our promise, make people's lives better, we're going to be just fine politically.
House GOP sources say they feel pretty good about where they are in terms of support for their tax proposal. They recognize they will likely lose some high-tax state Republicans by reducing the state and local deduction. Brett?
Mike Emanuel live in Washington. Mike, thanks. Joining me also, from Washington to talk more about the tax plan, House Ways and Means Committee Chairman Kevin Brady. Mr. Chairman, thanks for being here.
Thanks, Brett.
There are some substantive differences, as we just heard from Mike's piece, between the House plan that came out of your committee and the Senate plan. How do you rectify those?
Yeah, so some differences, but a lot more unity. And I think maybe the most important thing for the American people, real action. I mean, the House Ways and Means Committee approval today, that's the first time in 31 years Americans have seen this complex, ugly, unfair tax code changed in a big way. And at the end of the day, look, where we're going to unify, both in the House floor and with the Senate, is letting people keep more of what they earn, getting their paychecks revved up, and more importantly, bringing jobs back from around the world, including where you're at right now.
But you know, Chairman, you, after all this work, after all this time, you really still don't have the New York, California delegation on board yet, do you?
Well, I believe we do. So we won't have every member from every state. But look, when you take a look at the tax cuts, this new family tax credit that people up to $230,000 in their family can use for the first time ever, then restoring the state and local property tax deduction at double the average rate, you really provide relief in these high tax states as well.
All right, a state tax, that's a big difference between the two plans. Where does that end up? Is this all going to be ironed out in conference?
Yes, it will be, but I'll just tell you this, death tax is the most un-American tax we have. It's still the #1 reason our family-owned farms and businesses aren't passed down. And these families, these farmers, they're being doubled and triple taxed already. So, yes, we do have full and permanent repeal of the death tax in the House bill. We just feel very strongly about it.
What about the battles ahead? What is the biggest challenge for you as you look at that Senate plan to come together? I mean, is it reality before the end of the year? You know,
I believe it is, Brett, and here's why. Because we unified around President Trump with this one framework for the House and Senate to shoot to, that's, I think, the most critical thing. The House, you know, we are hitting the target, certainly did today. The Senate's going to as well. Are there some differences? Sure. But boy, there is far more unity in this, and that's what makes this different than health care. And I still think at the end of the day, America's divided over whether Obamacare helps him. Nobody, at least nobody, should be defending the status quo of this tax code.
You know, Senator Lindsey Graham put it pretty bluntly about the implications of this. Take a listen.
The party fractures. Most incumbents in 2018 will get a severe primary challenge. A lot of them will probably lose. The base will fracture. The financial contributions will stop. Other than that, it'd be fine.
The implications of if it fails, is that the driving force here?
You know, I think the biggest impact, if this fails, and it won't, by the way, is American people are saddled with this mess of a tax code. That's what's driving us. That's what's motivating us here in Congress. It is delivering on our promise, but more importantly, and our families, our local businesses, we're continuing to lose these jobs overseas. That's got to end. And my belief is Republicans believe we need a new tax code for a new era of prosperity in America, and we're acting on it. That's what makes this day such a historic day for the American people.
You know, repealing the Obamacare individual mandate, Mr. Chairman, would save $338 billion over 10 years. Some people say, why not do that and use those savings to help reduce taxes on the middle class?
Well, look, you know, at some point as this moves forward, you know, we are listening to members, and obviously the Senate has the opportunity to address that issue as well. What we know in the Ways and Means Committee is that we met the budget instruction. We think this moves us back toward a balanced budget, and these are still the lowest tax rates on our local businesses in modern history, and families at every income level keep more of what they earn. So this was a big step, and I think a very positive one.
Well, what do you think the biggest difference is? Is it the state and local taxes deduction, the fact that the Senate takes that off the table and you still have it?
Well, look, I think, Brett, at the end of the day, we'll work out these things out. We'll find that common ground. They're shooting exactly to the target that President Trump and the House and Senate put together earlier this year. And so I think it's healthy, you know, that each chamber takes a little different approach to this. Then we meet in the middle, find that common ground. As long as we deliver on letting people keep more of what they earn, a flatter, fair, simpler tax code, boy, it's going to be a big day for America.
Well, last thing, I mean, you can understand the skepticism because the plans substantively on big issues are different. So I get trying to come together, but there's still a large gap between the two.
Brett, there are so many skeptics in Washington, D.C. and around the world. I understand that, but I've noticed what used to be a zero chance of passing tax reform. Now I see 60, 70, 80, 90% likelihood this happens, and that's because we're not just talking about it anymore. We're acting on it, and the Ways and Means step today is crucial. The Senate financing taking up next week, crucial also. We're going to deliver in the House, and so what the American people are seeing are not just guesses, will this work, will it get done, we're actually taking action.
Mr. Chairman, we appreciate your time, and we'll follow it all along.
Great. Thank you, Brett.
Now another story gaining traction and attention in Washington. Allegations of sexual misconduct with a 14-year-old girl now face Alabama's Republican nominee for the U.S. Senate. The Washington Post reporting today about a claim that at age 32, Roy Moore had inappropriate contact with a young teen. A story Moore vehemently denies, but Washington and Alabama lawmakers are already weighing in. Correspondent Peter Ducey looks into that report.
There's a scandal in the Alabama special. The Republican candidate, 70-year-old Judge Roy Moore, is being accused of sexual misconduct in 1979, when he was 32, by a 53-year-old woman who says she was 14 when it happened. The Washington Post writes, quote, "She remembers that Moore kissed her, that he took off her pants and shirt, and that he touched her through her bra and underpants. She says that he guided her hand to his underwear and that she yanked her hand back." The accuser says she voted for President Trump and waited decades to accuse Moore of wrongdoing to avoid exposing her kids to troubles from her past and to dodge public scrutiny on personal debt and divorces that she was dealing with. But the Moore campaign counters he's been a public figure for 40 years, and if this story was true, it would have come out by now. Adding, quote, "National liberal organizations know their chosen candidate, Doug Jones, is in a death spiral, and this is their last-ditch Hail Mary. The Washington Post has already endorsed the judge's opponent, and for months they have engaged in a systematic campaign to distort the truth about the judge's record and career and derail his campaign." Moore, best known for getting kicked off the Alabama Supreme Court for defying an order to remove a statue of the Ten Commandments from courthouse grounds, beat Senator Luther Strange in a September primary.
This is not the result that we wanted,
but has been slow to separate himself from the Democrat Doug Jones. Last month, a Fox News poll had them tied. Now, the Real Clear Politics average of polls puts Moore 6 ahead. But Senate Republicans Republicans are now calling for him to quit campaigning. Senator John McCain said today, quote, he should immediately step aside. The Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, who Moore vilified during the primary campaign, says, quote, if these allegations are true, he must step aside. And that's a sentiment shared by dozens of Moore's would-be colleagues, like Senator Jeff Flake and Alabama's longtime Senator Richard Shelby.
If there's any shred of truth, he ought to step aside immediately.
If the revelations, if that's true, I don't believe there'd be any place for him in the U.S. Senate.
If Moore does drop out, he's still going to be on the ballot because it's so close to Election Day. And Alabama has something called a sore loser law that prevents Luther Strange from running as an independent because he's already lost this year. Strange could, though, still stage a write-in campaign. He hasn't said yet if that's what he's going to do. Brett?
And it all is interesting in the Senate math as well. Peter, thank you. The markets end the day in the red. The Dow lost 101 today. The S&P 500 slid 10. The Nasdaq was off 39. Next, the latest from Texas as new video gives us a first-hand look at some of the heroes in Sutherland Springs. First, throughout the broadcast, I'll share with you parts of my trip to China's most famous landmark. So as we head to break, some facts behind one of the 7 wonders of the medieval world, the Great Wall of China. The Great Wall of China is about an hour and a half outside of Beijing, where President Trump and President Xi are meeting. They're talking about North Korea and trade. Walls probably aren't on the agenda. But if President Trump saw this, he might have wall envy. The Great Wall of China is actually 13,170 miles long. President Trump only wants 700 to 900 miles along the U.S. southern border. Special report. Beautiful sunrise here in Beijing. The morning rush hour starting here as the president gets ready to leave. Eyewitnesses captured some of the intense final moments of a killer's life and the heroes who tried to stop him. This as the Air Force answered more questions today about how an error allowed the suspect in Sunday's deadly shooting in Texas to legally buy a gun. Correspondent Matt Finn reports from Sutherland Springs.
This is the gentleman who just shot up the church in Sutherland Springs.
New cell phone video from one of the 2 men who police say helped stop the Texas church shooter shows the intense moments after the gunman crashed his car and shot himself, fleeing the church where he murdered 26 people. Steve Williford, the man who police say grabbed a gun and ran barefoot to shoot the gunman, is heard talking to police.
I was home when I heard the shots and I didn't know what was going on. So I had to get in my safe. Okay.
The FBI is now trying to get evidence off the dead gunman's iPhone. But so far, the agency hasn't updated the status of its progress. Apple tells Fox News the FBI confirms the dead gunman's phone is an iPhone, but that the FBI didn't ask for help unlocking it. The FBI is not commenting on the phone. But today, an FBI director spoke about the growing trouble the agency has accessing cell phones.
Whether it's gangs, homicides, car accidents, civil disputes, we are unable to access many of these devices. And there's a challenge in explaining that because the Bureau looks like, hey, we want access to everything. That's obviously not what we are arguing.
For its part, the U.S. Air Force has launched a full-scale investigation into why it did not turn the shooter's criminal records over to the FBI, which should have prevented him from buying guns.
Since Sunday night, the Air Force Inspector General has talked to about 100 people involved in this case. We are looking at all of our databases, and if we have problems that we find, we'll fix them.
The Southern Baptist Convention tells Fox News the pastor of this church has expressed his desire to demolish it. Today, we've seen workers repairing and repainting it. And tonight, 11 people, including 4 minors, remain in the hospital, some still in critical condition. Brett?
Matt Finn live in Sutherland Springs. Matt, thank you. Senator Rand Paul's neighbor pleaded not guilty today to charges he assaulted the Kentucky Republican while he was mowing his lawn. Rene Boucher showed no emotion during the brief arraignment. Senator Paul says he suffered 6 broken ribs in that attack. Boucher faces up to a year in jail if convicted of 4th-degree assault. Lawmakers took time out of their busy schedules to honor 5 officers who put a stop to a shooting at a congressional baseball practice in June. House Majority Whip Steve Scalise, who was injured in that attack, joined others, leaders of the House and Senate, to present the officers with the Capitol Police Medal of Honor, the agency's highest honor. Next, a balancing act, getting a better trade deal with China. But first, a little history lesson from the Great Wall. President Nixon changed the U.S.-China relationship forever with his visit here to China in 1972. But it was his visit here to the Great Wall that changed something else. Tourism increased exponentially to the wall. And with that increase in tourism, China used the funds to restore portions of the wall like this one. Special report continues after this. Good morning from Beijing, 7:26 here in the morning. 3 countries have ordered their citizens out of Lebanon amid skyrocketing tensions between the Saudi and Lebanese governments. Correspondent Rich Edson joins us live from the State Department with a drill down of what's happening. Good morning, Rich. Good evening for you.
Good morning and good evening to you, Brett. And the proxy fight between Saudi Arabia and Iran is developing in a familiar venue. Lebanon, as Saudi Arabia's crown prince consolidates power and is pushing greater confrontation with its regional antagonist, Iran. Saudi Arabia's Ministry of Foreign Affairs says Saudi nationals visiting or living in Lebanon should leave the country as soon as possible. Kuwait and Bahrain are also asking their citizens to leave Lebanon. Earlier this week, the Saudi government claimed Iranian-backed Hezbollah's influence within Lebanon is so great that essentially it's becoming an act of war towards Saudi Arabia. This weekend, the Saudi-aligned Prime Minister of Lebanon, Said Hariri, resigned. He announced his decision from Saudi Arabia and is reportedly still there. The Saudi government is denying reports that it is holding Hariri against his will. Now, the French government says that French President Emmanuel Macron will be going to Saudi Arabia to meet with Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. The State Department says Secretary of State Rex Tillerson has spoken to his Saudi counterpart earlier this week regarding Lebanon, though refuses to give further details about that conversation. Brett?
And those trade enforcement actions.
Rich Edson at the State Department. Rich, thank you. As we reported earlier, President Trump's objective on this trip to Beijing was in part to persuade China to do more to rein in the nuclear program and the missile program of its client state, North Korea. But how well did the self-proclaimed master of the art of the deal do on his other main objective here, namely persuading China to do more to close its trade gap with America? Here's Chief Washington correspondent James Rosen.
Among the $250 billion in new trade agreements announced during President Trump's visit to Beijing are a deal for the China Energy Investment Corporation to pour $84 billion into West Virginia power projects and a 20% reduction in the value-added tax China places on imports of American distillers' dried grains. Among those unimpressed, Secretary of State Rex Tillerson.
Quite frankly, in the grand scheme of a $300 to $500 billion trade deficit, the things that have been achieved thus far are pretty small.
Candidate Trump vowed often to redress that deficit.
When I'm there, we turn it around, folks. We have the cards. We have a lot of power with China.
In Beijing, President Trump proved only marginally more conciliatory, saying he doesn't blame China, but rather his predecessors in the Oval Office who allowed the deficit to grow.
After all, who can blame a country for being able to take advantage of another country for the benefit of its citizens? I give China great credit.
Last year, the world's 2 largest economies traded an estimated $579 billion in goods. But last month, the imbalance grew by 12.2% over the year before. Rituals of American presidents' visits to China include an exchange of toasts between visitors and hosts and promises by the latter to expand market access for U.S. businesses and investors.
The investment and management environment for foreign enterprises, including those of the U.S., will be more open, more transparent, and more standardized.
But veteran China hands expressed skepticism that Beijing would do much to address the multiple factors that contribute to the imbalance.
I question whether the bilateral trade deficit is the biggest problem in the relationship. I'm far more worried about these other practices like compulsory technology transfer, lack of protection for intellectual property rights, subsidies to state-owned enterprises.
Candidate Trump also called China the greatest ever currency manipulator and promised repeatedly to designate Beijing as such. But within his first 90 days in office, President Trump rescinded that threat, telling the Wall Street Journal China had stopped the practice. Brett?
James Rosen in Washington. James, thanks. Joining me here to talk more about the delicate diplomatic balance with China, Paul Handley, director of the Carnegie Tsinghua Center for Global Policy and former National Security Council staffer for former Presidents George H.W. Bush and Barack Obama. Paul, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, Brett.
You heard James's piece there. Your take on this trade back and forth that President Trump is trying to kind of change the dynamic.
You know, that's true, and I think we've seen the Chinese here really roll out the red carpet for President Trump and give all sorts of pomp and ceremony, and President Trump seems to have liked that. He seems to have appreciated that from a personal standpoint. He heaped lavish praise on President Xi. And the $250 billion worth of deals at the end of the day, it's a good thing. It gives momentum to the business community, and that's a good thing. But there are some real structural economic and trade issues that are on the agenda that President Trump mentioned yesterday in his press conferences, but we don't know whether or not progress was achieved on those issues.
You know, on, for example, steel exports, which is a big sticking issue for American steel, Chinese steel exports, and the reports show they've increased over the years. 2015 was a big year. It doesn't seem like that imbalance, for example, is going to get addressed.
That's the key of the issue, is that China is closed off. They're also dumping steel and other products into the United States and Europe. Frankly, these are issues that we have common concern with our European friends on. And President Trump came here hoping to make real progress. These are the structural issues in the U.S.-China relationship, where he talks about the need to rebalance the relationship in a more fair and more reciprocal way. If progress is not made, I think we may begin to see a harder tone coming out of the United States with respect to its policy towards China.
Well, just the shift in tone here is very noticeable. I mean, obviously from the campaign trail and early months in the presidency, President Trump was very aggressive when he talked about China. It's a different scenario when you're traveling abroad and you're being hosted by a host country here, but the message was much different.
Well, to a certain extent, I think the Chinese had concluded that President Trump is susceptible to some of that rolling out of the red carpet and the pomp and ceremony. If they can please him, then potentially they can head off some of these forces in the United States that really are gathering. You know, if you listen to Lighthizer, the trade representative, talk about these structural trade and economic issues, he's got a very tough tone. And I think that when President Trump goes back to Washington, they're going to ask, what progress was made on these important issues?
You know, Steve Hilton was on our show last night and said he was concerned that in an effort to get the ball moved on North Korea, that there would be kind of a softening, a giving up on the harder stances about trade. Do you sense that?
I think that would be a mistake, and I think others in his administration think that would be a mistake. He's the only one, President Trump is the only one I've heard talk about that kind of negotiating strategy. These trade and economic issues by themselves are extremely important for the future health of the U.S.-China relationship. If we can't fix these, the relationship over the long term will potentially derail.
Well, Paul, thank you very much for coming out on a chilly Beijing morning.
It certainly is chilly.
We appreciate it. America's national anthem is the target of racist claims. What lyrics some say give the tone racial undertones. We'll explain that. First, more of that history from the Great Wall of China. It's believed construction of the Great Wall of China started more than 2,700 years ago. Legend has it that more than 1 million workers died building this wall and that the remains are inside the wall, which is why it was known as the longest cemetery on Earth. Special report continues. Morning traffic here in Beijing. It's rush hour, 7:38 in the morning. Welcome back. America's national anthem, obviously the focus of a lot of attention, coming under fire again for what some are now calling racist lyrics. National correspondent William LaJeunesse reports tonight on the controversy over one of America's biggest patriotic tributes.
Oh, say can you see? Written in 1814, President Woodrow Wilson recognized the Star-Spangled Banner as the national anthem in 1916, and Congress later affirmed it. Though heard all the time, the song itself rarely drew much attention until NFL players began kneeling during the anthem as a way to protest social injustice. That's when the California NAACP took a closer look at the words.
It's racist. It doesn't represent our community. It's anti-black people. The real intention got overlooked, and it's become something that's dividing us. And I'm looking for a way to bring us back together.
Francis Scott Key wrote the lyrics as he watched British warships bomb Fort McHenry in Baltimore. Here are the words in the rarely sung third stanza the NAACP finds offensive. No refuge could save the hireling and slave from the terror of flight or the gloom of the grave.
We don't use that third bar. We don't readily hear it, so why not just take it out? If it's offensive to some people and it's hurtful, then I say take it out.
Historians, however, strongly disagree about the context of those lyrics. Here's why. Hireling and slave refer to black slaves liberated by the British, some of whom fought against the states. To Key, they were mercenaries and traitors. But that doesn't mean the song celebrates slavery, say most historians. The British also manipulated blacks to fight with the unfulfilled promise of freedom. And lyrics elsewhere refer to blacks and whites alike as free men fighting for the states.
It's a song. Keep it original. It's like messing with somebody's Picasso art because you didn't like how her nose was too big.
Critics say the group is creating a controversy where none exists. The NAACP is now hoping a member of Congress will sponsor their bill to kill or change the Star-Spangled Banner as the national anthem. Brett?
Amazing. William, thank you. Veterans Day is Saturday. There are a lot of programs out there. Now our nation's heroes have a wonderful opportunity to pick up a golf club and play around through a program led by Professional Golfers Association professionals. As Lucas Tomlinson reports, the program called PGA Hope has helped more than 3,500 veterans leave their problems behind, at least for a day.
And this has been the best therapy I've ever done.
Chris Nowak lost his leg during a friendly fire training accident. Today, the Marine Corps veteran assists the PGA's Hope program, helping veterans heal through the game of golf.
They're interacting with their fellow veterans, integrating back into society, but more importantly, we're giving them that moment in time. We're allowing them to focus on something other than their injury.
Retired Army Sergeant First Class Ramon Padilla saw some of the Afghan war's toughest fighting in the Korengal Valley.
I have my weapon, which is my club. I have my ball, which is my bullets. I have the flag, which is my target. So it's like still being in the military. I just don't have golf balls shooting back at me.
There we go.
We're here for you.
PGA Hope has the support of the greatest player that's ever played the game.
It takes a nation to heal our veterans. Now it's our turn to fight for you, to offer every chance for a healthy and successful life.
Fox News caught up with Nowak and Padilla at Congressional Country Club outside the nation's capital. The club's rich history dates back nearly 100 years. Presidents Coolidge, Taft, Hoover, Wilson, and Harding were lifetime members. It hosted the U.S. Open 3 times.
Well, we're Congressional Country Club, so just by its name, we're very patriotic. It's unbelievable that these folks can come out after being in such intense environments, are able to come here, try and relax, re-enter their lives here, and if there's something that we can do to just help them along, we're very proud to be able to do that.
Doesn't look like you need to hit that. It looks like it's a steeper down.
Well, it is. For 6 weeks, 10 PGA professionals at the club volunteered their time. And for the players, that goes a long way.
This is better than medicine. This is better than counseling for me personally. And I think the other veterans are finding that as well.
At the Pentagon, Lucas Tomlinson, Fox News.
It's a great program. Next up, whether President Trump's softening tone towards China is really a reality, plus the tax reform battle ahead. But first, more from our walk along the Great Wall. Guard towers or watchtowers dot the Great Wall of China every few hundred yards. At peak season, some 35,000 to 40,000 people visit this site. One of the myths is that you can see the Great Wall from space. You can't, but it's still very impressive. Special report continues after this.